talk about sort of how I approach writing a film score. A lot of people ask me about that. And it might be different than like a big Hollywood composer like John Williams or something might approach a film. Since this film already exists, and one, there's really no deadline as far as making the big premiere, because this deadline was September 3rd today and tomorrow. It's not like he was breathing down my back to have this thing done in a couple of weeks. So I actually am able to sit with the film for a long time. So I generally watch the film as an audience member once, just like I would go to the theater and watch a movie and be entertained by the movie. And then I watch it 2 or 3 more times, sort of picking apart how it's structured, what the characters are doing, when the characters come back, maybe the overall form of the film, the themes and sub-themes. Just so I have an idea of all of that that's going on as I compose, so that I can tie different things together and I actually can have some sort of direction for the music through the entire film. And then I sit down, and with this film, because it's nicely organized in the prologue, and then there's 6 acts that follow, I just sat down and watched the prologue a million times and just wrote music for the prologue. And as you can probably tell, a lot of the music is improvised, especially in the first, the prologue, and there's several scenes early on in the movie in the first act and the second act where there's either like a prolonged sort of takeover of the temple and the burning of the temple. There's a big battle scene coming up that I felt the visual aspects, the drama, the effect would be more effective if the musicians were actually improvising with the footage that they're seeing. I think that spontaneous kind of composition can really underlie the drama more so than if I had tried to compose something and try to bring that out. And then I did that for each subsequent act. And with this particular film, I did it in order. At the pinnacle scene for me happens in the middle of the film. So the middle of the film and the end of the film were always in my brain to try to figure out what I was going to do for them. So that was kind of happening simultaneously with me actually sitting down going in order, composing the different sections. So that's a generalization of what I did to write for this film. Do you have any questions for me about the film or the music or the musicians? Yes?
So do you plan to record it?
It's being recorded tomorrow, and audio recorded for having that done, so I might be able to sync it up with film, probably most likely for my own use. I'm not sure I haven't looked permission as far as making that an item to purchase. Any other questions? Yeah?
Do you use any kind of motives for the certain characters?
Yeah, the Nathan motive, which you've heard already in a couple different variations, has happened. No. Just Nathan's really the main character. That this is all, the prologue obviously is all sort of backstory of what's going on. There's also a lot going on in the prologue. You find out a lot of information in kind of a short period of time. So a lot of that music doesn't come back actually. The Nathan music does, which you'll hear. It's the melody that happens in the bass. It's both pizzicato, just plucking the strings, and also arco with the bow. And you'll hear that come back a bunch of times. Hopefully next week. And there's other things. As the characters show up, you'll notice different things that happen for them. Yeah?
Yeah. The theme, I guess, for Nathan, when they're going, the brothers have just spoken and they're kind of going, you're going towards him, the camera's going towards him. And that theme, I thought, was kind of multi-dimensional. It was like sensual, dance-like, Hebraic, Middle Eastern, and lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad that all comes across. I try to, because of all these characters, especially the Nathan character, is an extremely deep, he's a deep individual, and his character, obviously, as you can already tell, goes through a lot. And just how he ties into the whole story, he's the pinnacle figure, obviously, since the title of the film, I guess. So I wanted something, and I think a lot of that's brought out because the melody itself is very simple, and that way I can actually harmonize it in different ways to kind of create different varieties of depth or sweetness or
So I know you've seen the film several times and you're able to improvise to what you see. I'm wondering about the score and the rest of the players. Does everybody have to watch the movie several times so they know what's coming up and how to improvise over it?
Yeah, just a logistical thing, when I do have music going on, I mean, there's improvised sections, let's say even coming out of an improvised section, there might be some sort of audible cue that either I play or one of the other musicians plays that gets us out of that improvised section into the next written or composed music. Sometimes it's a visual cue, like, one of the visual cues for this is after, I guess it's before Nathan receives the baby. It just says Nathan, and that's the cue. So when you see Nathan on the screen, Scott plays the bass melody. And so a lot of the cues are that way. There'll be a visual cue, it'll say something in the score that's happening on the screen, or it will be a text block that the subtitles will have. And then when you see that on screen or read that text, that's when the next thing starts. So the musicians, there's a lot of points where the musicians are responsible for starting those themselves. Sometimes I cue them, sometimes they cue as well. And sometimes if there's other things going on, so there's sometimes where the three of us are playing sort of independently from one another, and whoever's cue it is, they just have to go on with that part of the scene. Like in this last one, when they're taking over the town, and there's a scene where a spear hits the door, and the bad guy comes through the carpet making thing. That was all trumpet cues, and we were playing our thing, and when he saw it was on the screen, he would react to it. Yeah, in the back.
Yes, these old films were filmed with fewer frames per second, and then when they were, I believe at the time when they were shown, they would have been shown on projectors, which were like the cameras, and they would not appear to be moving so quickly. And then, so now with all our technology, have we ever considered taking these old films and actually showing them at their actual speed rather than speed up? And how would, the musical question, how would that have affected the musical interpretations if somebody had gone and prepared this at natural speed rather than in Keystone Cop speed?
That has actually affected us dramatically in a performance. Depending on, sometimes the script actually travels with the print themselves, and so that's the print we use. Sometimes it's just up to the theater to get the print, and we were doing some Buster Keaton shorts, and they were all running considerably faster than the music. We had to make a bunch of drastic changes, and then actually in the end it turned out we actually had our videotape copies of these things. We actually had them display the videotape copy because it was just all of a sudden being way out of hand for the adjustments. But this film runs at the speed it was originally meant to run at. A lot of the films, especially the dramas, the new Metropolis, when they revised it, they accounted for that difference in the film technology. Most things, well, I shouldn't say most things, but a lot of things are actually run at the correct speed. So, and this one we're seeing in the correct speed. This film also doesn't actually exist as a print anymore. Once they made this digital copy of it to print, and I might have the story wrong, but I think the print was either unusable at that point, or they just decided to keep that print preserved because the more you run something off of a print, it wears it out. So I think either it was unusable or they wanted to really preserve it, so it's just available in this digital format. Any other questions for this prologue? We'll continue with the first and second act.